Ladies and gentlemen, how are you this morning? Apologies for getting you here so early. You know how crazy the commute is. My very lovely name is Zainab Wandati, and I'm going to be your moderator over the next 1 hour on this day of agriculture and food at COP28. And we're going to talk about livestock and the role they play in climate proofing the African continent and how they can help in building the resilience of our communities across the continent. And to have this conversation, I'd like to invite a very able panel of experts who will sit, and unfortunately I'll not sit with you. I need to stand here so that everyone can see my pretty face. So the rest of you will sit, but I'll stand. So I'd like to invite Namkolo. Namkolo, please, welcome. The only other lady on this panel. You look radiant in red. You look radiant in red. So you'll sit closest to me. Kagelo Maso, Environmental Health and Biodiversity Impact Platform Director. Welcome, Kagelo. Kagele, did I say that correctly? Kagele? Like that, Kagele. Okay, Hussein Wario, my fellow countryman. Welcome, Hussein. Hussein is from the Center for Research and Development in Dry Lands. Dr. El Haji Traore. Welcome, Dr. El Haji. Dr. El Haji is from the Senegal Institute of Agricultural Research, ISRA. And last but not least, before we actually get started, I need to, you see there's a QR code on your screen. That QR code is to enable translation. It works with your phone. So all you need to do is scan it. I think your phone might ask you to download another app. It's okay to download it so that you can hear. If you don't have headphones, there's a lovely lady behind the room. She's waving. You can go to her and she'll assist you with a listening device, headphones like this. If you have a Type-C phone, do not worry, she will sort you out. So that scanner is to enable translation. That means, Dr. Traore, you can make your presentation in French if you'd like. So while you get your scanners ready and while you scan that and get your listing ready, I'd like to invite Dr. Jojo Mkoya, the team lead of Agnes, the African Group of Negotiators Expert Support, to make his welcome remarks. I don't know if this works, but you can use mine.
Morning, delegates. Very happy to see you. I know it is too early. Some of you take many hours to get here, but thanks for coming. Livestock is very, very important for Africa. And I speak as a negotiator, leading G77, 134 countries. In the agriculture negotiations, we have had discussions around livestock with our partners. And some of the suggestions that came out of the discussions that we've had in the negotiations clearly indicated that many do not understand livestock in Africa. We think livestock is equal in all places. But as you know, and I'm sure the distinguished panelists will demonstrate, that livestock in Africa is unique. It is tied to the people's livelihood, it's tied to the culture, it ties to income and many, many other things. And therefore, you cannot just from nowhere and say, okay, reduce numbers, because that's usually the common and the easiest solution that is provided. But you need to think a little bit more about that. Second, the reality is, yes, livestock contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. We must admit. And all you need to do is just go to the national communications of many of African countries, and you'll see some of the main sources of emissions are from the AFOLU sector: agriculture, forestry, and land use. And because our countries have collectively committed to contribute to addressing emission reductions, then it means that we must also make effort to demonstrate that we are also reducing emissions in that sector. How we do it? We must find solutions that lend themselves to the way the people of Africa connect with livestock. And finally, I want to end by this very important livestock system that sometimes is condemned, but if you look at it scientifically, you realize that actually our forefathers were actually looking at sustainability, and that's pastoralism. Pastoralism, by its very nature, they move from one place, having grazed that area, then they move to another one to allow the place to regenerate. But of course, we are pushing them to be sedentary, which means, therefore, we are causing land degradation, because now you can't get them moved, because some of the pathways they used to follow have been settled on. And so we need to address this. How do we revitalize the pastoralism, which is very important across Africa? If you look at the Horn of Africa, you look at the Sahel, and you look at all those places, pastoralism is with us. And therefore, you cannot talk about livestock in Africa without talking about pastoralism. And it's on this basis that Agnes, the African Group of Negotiators and Expert Support, approached ILRI, and with the discussions, we said we needed to have in-depth understanding of Africa's livestock so that we are able to change the narrative. We need to tell our story, not others telling about our story. And therefore, we are working with ILRI and other partners just to make sure that we have African livestock narrative, which our colleagues in the media, like Zainab and others, can be able to communicate and share widely so that we are all in a position to understand the livestock status in Africa. And with that, I welcome you to this event, and I look forward to very exciting discussions, because for us, livestock is important, and we want to unlock resources into livestock. And that can only happen if our partners understand the importance of livestock in the context of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mkoya. Thank you. Now I'd like us to listen to a lady's voice. We're going to be hearing a lot of masculine voices, so it's important if we get to hear the pretty voices at the top. So I'd like to invite Namkolo, who is the ILRI Director General Representative to Ethiopia, CGIAR Ethiopia Country Convener, and CGIAR Regional Director for East and Southern Africa.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we need a livestock narrative for Africa. And this narrative needs to be informed by, first of all, why livestock is important for our continent, the challenges we face, and also what we can do about those challenges. In sub-Saharan Africa, agriculture accounts for 17.5% of our gross domestic product, so quite important for our economies. And 57% of employment also is from agriculture. When you compare this to the high-income countries, it is 2% of their gross domestic product and only 3% of employment coming from agriculture. So you can see already just by those numbers how important livestock would be. Livestock are therefore quite important to African economies. Livestock are livelihoods, they are bank accounts, and valuable cultural assets, including as insurance in difficult times. And for women, small ruminants and chickens like poultry, in some settings are some of the important financial autonomy providers to these women. Our consumption of meat is still low on average on the African continent, 5.4 kilograms per person per year in Ethiopia, 12 kilograms in Cameroon, 15.9 in Kenya, 31 kilograms in Mauritania, and that compares to 124 kilograms in the US and 88 in Europe. Our livestock systems on the continent are divided into two main types: mixed crop livestock systems and pastoralist systems, as you have heard. The nature of these systems vary by country and by agroecology in subnational settings, and agroecologies sometimes across borders, as we find across the Sahel and some parts of the Horn of Africa. And so mobility becomes extremely important. Now, livestock are a key component of mixed crop livestock systems, where integration is an important entry point for food systems transformation that can enhance provision of ecosystem services to improve soil health as well as sustainability. In pastoral settings, livestock are indeed the predominant livelihood, where arid nature of the settings simply cannot support crop agriculture. So you cannot do away with livestock in those areas. And in this area, the prevailing food systems depend on livestock to convert grass that people cannot eat into valuable livelihoods as well as food. And pastoralism is the primary source of income and nutrition for some 268 million people in 36 African countries. Transformation of food systems requires, therefore, a nuanced attention to these different settings. Because of the characteristics of food systems across the diverse settings of both mixed crop livestock systems as well as pastoralism systems, we actually require different approaches to adaptation and mitigation to climate on the African continent. For example, many pastoralist settings where livestock are the dominant livelihoods, animals are mostly for sale and not for food. The income is used to serve what you and I use our salaries for: buy starchy cereals, pulses, for health care, pay for school fees, and other needs of life. When communities in these areas lose their animals due to drought or flooding, devastation is the outcome. Adaptation and transition in these settings call for researchers and development practitioners to develop and bring science that is culturally based in terms of solutions to support adaptation and mitigation. Africa has very high levels of undernutrition. Using children under 5 years old as an example, 31% of them were stunted according to the Global Nutrition Report in 2022. We know that animal source food are important to reduce those stunting levels and also address multiple micronutrient deficiencies that affect the continent. 57% of the population of Africa lives below $3.20 per day. Remember that the same percentage, 57%, also depend on agriculture as the key livelihood. This is a lot of people, many of whom will indeed depend on livestock as their key livelihoods. So our transformation of food systems must address livestock in this nuance. Farmers face a constellation of challenges associated with climate change and the environmental degradation associated with it. Rising temperatures are causing heat stress to the animals. Droughts, floods, and unpredictable rainfalls also create havoc. Indeed, livestock productivity is very low. Using milk as an example, milk yields across Africa remain very low. Between 1961 and 2021, milk productivity rose from 153 to 315 kilograms per cow per year in Ethiopia. 106%. Sounds impressive until you hear that during the same time period, the figures for North America were a rise from 3,230. Already the baseline tells you how far we are. From 3,230 to 10,502 kilograms per year per cow, 225%. But that percentage means nothing if you consider where we are coming from. Like the cows of North America, however, cows on the African continent also have to eat, and they also burp greenhouse gas emissions like their colleagues. But with milk productivity numbers that I just shared, it goes without saying that our greenhouse gas emission intensities are very high. So per unit of products, we would produce more. And so even though we are producing 3% of those greenhouse gas emissions, what you see is that for us to move the needle, to still work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we have to do something about our productivity levels. If a cow produces 2 liters of milk per day when 10 liters or 20 is possible, can you imagine the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions we can have just by increasing productivity? Similarly, productivity for other animal source products, meat and eggs, remain low, and these are areas where transformation needs to help us by bringing those numbers up. I could go on with many more examples, but unfortunately, I don't have time to do that. But the key message I want to give you is that improving productivity is our most significant front to addressing greenhouse gas emissions from livestock right now. Disease is also a big challenge, but here we need to work on issues around vaccination, vaccine production, and vaccinations. Are these challenges going to change in the near future? Not likely, because climate change is not done with us yet. It will continue going bad, which is why we need to do something. Is there anything that we can do to adapt? Fortunately, yes. So what can we do? Direct climate financing to adaptation and mitigation efforts is important to help with the following. 1, in all settings, livestock can contribute to providing ecosystem services that can enhance adaptation and soil health, and also ultimately improve sustainability. This can be done and has been demonstrated in a number of places in work that has been done, bringing on board crop and forage rotation systems, integrating them with livestock, leading to better soil health and preventing land degradation. There we can invest. We need better genetics to improve productivity. This entails combining genes that confer higher productivity and genes that also give adaptive capacity. And here, we already have genes that have been identified that confer adaptation to heat stress. We can also need to look at the feeding and forage efforts that are being made, and these can be incorporated into crop rotation systems, as I said, to address soil health and prevent land degradation. The above efforts can be combined with agroforestry as well, and these are forests trees that are leguminous trees that can help improve soil health as well. Again, we have examples where this has been done. Water harvesting techniques in rainy times include developing drainage infrastructure that can recharge water tables and catch water for use in times of water stress and stretch the time and allow some greater level of sustainability. All of the above fall into generative, regenerative, and agroecological principles that we hear about in the global north. They are possible, and in many cases, they have been part of traditional production systems in our past. Index-based livestock insurance has been tried in both Kenya and Ethiopia to limit negative impacts of droughts. Each setting on the African continent will need nuanced attention, and the most optimal combinations of interventions to provide meaningful benefits according to the settings is what we need climate financing for. The program on accelerating impact of CGIAR climate research in Africa has developed climate-smart agriculture technologies and innovations supported by early warning systems and services. And again here, investments from climate financing are needed to bring these into scale. The African Union has continental strategies whose objectives support the needed adaptation and mitigation. Again, climate financing can help there. I want to leave you with key messages on what a new narrative for Africa's livestock could entail. Livestock production plays a critical role in livelihoods, nutrition, and climate adaptation across diverse production systems in Africa, and has, I repeat, has the potential to contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals of Africa's Agenda 23 that we have on the continent. The social, cultural, and potential environmental benefits of livestock keeping must be considered when evaluating the negative environmental impacts and also where we invest climate financing. Livestock production systems can be part of the solution addressing climate change. What we need is to invest in those solutions. The African Union, as I have said, has devised a range of policy strategies which can inform a new narrative for Africa's livestock narrative. So here, I really want to call upon Agnes to do something about bringing a strong Africa continental agreement on what the African livestock narrative could be. I want to finish off by saying, directing climate financing to improving productivity, sustainability, adaptation, and mitigation within livestock systems, nuanced to Africa's different settings, is important for future of the farmers and pastoralists on the African continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now that we have set the scene, we've listened to both Dr. Omukoya and Tunamkolo, and we have an idea of what the situation looks like. So now I get to do the journalistic things, which is to ask people questions. Journalists, we like to ask questions, but we don't like to be asked questions. So I'd like to start with Dr. Traore. You're the far end. I'd like to start with you. Tell us a little bit about how then we can balance the need for adaptation strategies in Africa's livestock sector with the long-term goals that you have for climate mitigation and mitigating climate impacts.
Merci beaucoup, Madame. I will do my speech in French because, you know, I come from French-speaking country, and my English is so bad that I think that it's better to speak French. Bien, ceci dit, je vais donc faire mon intervention en français. Je vais taquiner la journaliste. Je vois que je suis le francophone, je suis un peu isolé par rapport aux autres. Je suis seul ici alors qu'ils sont 3 ici. Je crois qu'on aurait dû faire un peu de balance pour qu'on soit 2 ici et 2 là-bas. Mais bon, ça, c'est pas grave. Bien, je remercie Madame Kramer qui m'a donné l'opportunité de prendre part à cette importante réunion, ce important panel pour parler d'élevage. Donc, pour ceux qui ne le savent pas, je suis Dr Elhaji Traoré, je suis vétérinaire de formation, chercheur, directeur de recherche à l'Institut sénégalais de recherche agricole, et j'ai longtemps été directeur scientifique de cet institut. Actuellement, je coordonne un projet de recherche sur élevage et gaz à effet de serre dans les pays du SILS. Bien, votre question m'intéresse et je pense que les 2 collègues qui viennent de parler ont implanté le décor et ont donné l'importance de l'élevage en Afrique, que les gens ne comprennent pas. Et je pense que quand on parle d'élevage en Afrique, il faut comprendre que l'animal a un rôle, c'est vrai, économique, mais aussi a un rôle socio-économique à prendre en compte et qui n'est pas souvent considéré. Et c'est dommage qu'on attribue, bon, c'est vrai, les animaux, surtout les ruminants, contribuent aux émissions de gaz à effet de serre, surtout le méthane entérique, ça on ne peut pas le nier, mais je pense que les méthodes de calcul qui sont utilisées pour déterminer cela, ou bien en tout cas pour dire que nous polluons, nos animaux polluent beaucoup, ne sont pas adaptées. Parce que ce n'est pas logique qu'on puisse prendre l'émission d'une vache pour diviser cela par rapport à la productivité, le lait ou bien la viande. Si on le fait, nous sommes... c'est à notre détriment parce que nos vaches ne produisent pas beaucoup. 3 ou 4 litres contre 30 ou 40 litres, ce n'est pas une comparaison. 500 ou 250 ou 500 kg de viande par rapport à 1 tonne de viande, ce n'est pas une comparaison. C'est pourquoi nous, quelques chercheurs du Sud, Sénégal, Burkina, Mali, etc., et du Nord, France, Belgique, etc., nous sommes dit qu'il faut donner une autre vision de notre élevage par rapport à cela, une autre compréhension. Donc nous nous sommes réunis entre chercheurs de diverses disciplines, vétérinaires, agronomes, forestiers, sociologues, pour quand même pouvoir adresser cette question et montrer que l'animal en tant que tel appartient à un système. Nous parlons ici du système pastoral. Donc c'est un système dans lequel l'animal est en relation avec la nature parce qu'il consomme le pâturage naturel, il se déplace en relation avec l'homme qui est le propriétaire, en relation avec le sol, il contribue aussi à améliorer le sol et il utilise les marques temporaires. Donc pour le faire, nous avons mis en place un certain nombre de dispositifs. D'abord, nous avons essayé de faire un travail de référence, ce qui existe, les connaissances que l'on a par rapport aux émissions de gaz à effet de serre par l'élevage. Et ensuite, nous avons essayé, à partir de là, d'améliorer les dispositifs de mesure ou bien d'ajouter d'autres dispositifs de mesure qui nous permettent de pouvoir quantifier, de pouvoir comprendre le rôle de l'animal dans cette émission de gaz à effet de serre. C'est pourquoi nous avons beaucoup travaillé sur le green feed pour pouvoir évaluer de façon directe les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Nous avons essayé aussi d'améliorer un outil que la FAO a mis en place, le GLIM AI, mais de l'améliorer en tenant compte des paramètres d'animaux qui nous viennent de l'Afrique, parce que ce green feed a été conçu avec des paramètres d'animaux qui sont européens. Nous avons essayé donc d'ajouter paramètres africains pour que son travail soit utile. Nous avons également des dispositifs de mesure des émissions de gaz dans l'environnement, les plantes, les arbres, etc. Tout cela combiné, ça nous donne cette relation entre l'animal et son milieu. Nous allons travailler également sur les arbres, parce qu'on parle d'agroforesterie. Nos animaux se nourrissent d'arbres, d'arbustes et de lignes. Nous avons essayé de suivre la croissance des lignes, racinaires, troncs, avec des occasions allométriques qui nous permettent de comprendre la capacité de séquestration du carbone par les arbres. Et le tout combiné, ça nous donne un bilan donc carbone de l'élevage pastoral. Donc, il faut considérer. Et ce bilan, nous pensons qu'il est beaucoup plus positif que négatif. C'est-à-dire que nos animaux séquestrent ou bien aident à sécréter plus de carbone qu'ils n'émettent de gaz à effet de serre. Et ce sont ces résultats sur lesquels nous travaillons et nous pensons qu'on va très prochainement pouvoir délivrer un message très clair dans ce sens. Bon, d'habitude, les gens disent que les animaux africains émettent peut-être 40, 50 kg de méthane par an. Bon, c'est un chiffre qui est là, mais qui n'a pas été étayé avec des recherches très claires. Et l'action que nous avons actuellement montre que ce chiffre est trop surestimé. Je ne peux pas donner un chiffre exact parce qu'on est en train de travailler, mais certainement nous allons arriver à des chiffres beaucoup plus inférieurs à cela. Mais surtout, nous allons démontrer que notre élevage a d'autres fonctions qui sont beaucoup plus que cette fonction économique de lait ou bien de viande, mais une fonction sociale ou socio-économique à considérer. Je crois que je vais faire une petite parenthèse pour parler un peu de l'agriculture. On l'oublie souvent. L'agriculture en Afrique est très importante, surtout quand on parle de l'élevage familial. Il s'agit d'une action qui permet aux familles de se nourrir, c'est vrai, mais aussi d'avoir de l'argent comptant à tout moment. Nous qui sommes du milieu rural, quand on part à l'école, quand l'école ouvre en octobre, en général, en Afrique de l'Ouest, il n'y a rien, aucune récolte est encore possible pour être vendue et permettre aux élèves d'aller étudier. Donc, ce qu'on fait souvent, c'est vendre des poulets, pouvoir payer des cahiers, des habits, des chaussures, des sacs pour les élèves. Donc, je crois que c'est un rôle important à considérer. Également, la poule a des rôles socio-économiques parce qu'on sait qu'en Afrique, beaucoup préfèrent aller se soigner avec en tout cas, les guérisseurs traditionnels. Et ces gens ont souvent, pour les payer, il faut leur donner des poulets. Et dans ce cas, la couleur du poulet, la façon dont les plumes sont ébouriffées ou pas, compte beaucoup. Donc, je crois que ce sont également là des rôles qu'il faut prendre en compte. Et même en milieu céréales et peul au Sénégal, on dit que pour avoir une richesse qui soit stable, il faut commencer par la poule. Avoir quelques poules qu'on va vendre plus tard, avoir des petits ruminants, ensuite avoir des animaux. Et quand on le fait, notre économie, notre richesse est beaucoup plus stable. Donc, ça, c'était une petite parenthèse sur l'agriculture, mais c'est pour vous dire que l'élevage est important. Voilà, je ne sais pas si je répondais à votre question, mais je crois que pour un premier temps, bon, peut-être c'est assez bon. Mais nous sommes là pour discuter, donc très ouverts à cela. En tout cas, notre projet qui est financé par l'Union européenne est constitué d'institutions de recherche du Sénégal, du Burkina Faso, du Mali, du Niger, avec une extension au Mali, au Tchad et en Mauritanie. Et nous travaillons en tout cas ensemble et on pense qu'on va avoir une deuxième phase parce qu'il y a certaines questions qui n'ont pas été répondues et on espère pouvoir répondre. Le projet devait se terminer cette année en décembre 2023, mais on a eu une prolongation d'1 an supplémentaire, donc jusqu'en décembre 2024.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone manage to get on the translations? You did? Good. So I'd like to now come to to Hussein. Hussein, pastoralists themselves have also been known to be key contributors to the climate crisis and to biodiversity loss and to desertification. So as we talk about changing the narrative for Africans, how do you see the pastoralists themselves playing a role in this?
Well, thank you so much, Zainab. And first to start with, I would like to say that I'm not only here, as an expert or a practitioner, I'm here as a pastoralist as well. My family, myself, still do keep livestock on the range. So I'm here to talk about personal experiences. And I'm so happy also that livestock, particularly within the pastoral setup, is getting this recognition. It's been quite a while that they have been pushed aside and they have not been into questions, of government economies and plans as such. So this conversation is really important for us. And I also want to re-emphasize the role it plays beyond, the monetary values that we talk about, the cultural aspect, the identity. For some of us, without livestock, we cannot call ourselves who we are. And to add also, the land upon which we graze is not just for grazing purposes, it also holds that cultural identity. So when you remove the land, the livestock out of our lives, then life will not have meaning for us, in short. So that's how important then this debate is for us as a pastoralist. So to say, particularly this new narrative is quite important in the sense that it brings back this neglected sector into center of conversation. And if you look at our own countries, mainly pastoralism practices in Africa, there's a lot of underinvestment in the system. And if you look at any economy or any vibrant sector, without policy frameworks, without support from the governments, there's no sector that can work on its own. But surprisingly, actually, pastoralism surpassed what people thought. People thought it will die off and be a thing of the past, but it is persistent. And that is why actually we're talking about it today. Otherwise, if you look at the neglect, then it should have been long gone. But when you talk about now the issues around the role the pastoralists themselves have to play, we have to look at the centrality of how pastoralism manages, its resources, how the livestock are managed. And George already, and even Wamkoya mentioned that mobility, having access, to grazing resources is central. And pastoralists, through their own knowledge, through intergenerationally, transferred knowledge systems, they have had a way of managing the range. And all that is almost getting lost because of the constraint that they have been facing. So one of the things that needs to be central to this conversation is how can the land rights, rights of pastoral communities be at the center of the conversation? And having the right means, having the right to be able to manage the land and to be able to retain the land that is important for this particular production system. And as we speak, and as we struggle to address the changing climate, part of the thing that we are doing actually is making communities, pastoral communities, even more vulnerable. And a case example is where we have expansions, of, for example, green energy projects that are very important for the transition into green economies. But how land is acquired, how the benefits to pastoralist communities are undertaken, it really makes communities to be vulnerable. And when I say this, I come from northern Kenya, and particularly Marsabit County, which hosts the largest wind farm in Africa. And how it has been implemented, how it is currently being run, remains quite controversial and has been a matter of court case for many years.
Hussein, before you put your microphone down, let me just ask you this. Why is this talking never a conversation that the pastoralist communities want to consider? Reducing the number of their herds.
One, I think, when you talk about reducing the number of the herd, we approach it from a negative sense, in the sense that wealth that people have created, in a difficult circumstance, becomes a problem. And it's only a situation where I think wealth is viewed that way. One of the things that pastoralists have not had is marketing systems that work for them. And that is why they hold on to livestock, because they don't see the value that they have put in these livestock on the market. And secondly, when we say you have so many livestock, one, it's always debatable. For example, I'm from Kenya. When was the last livestock census that were done to show that we have so many livestock anyway? But even if there were many livestock, how many households actually in northern Kenya have even livestock that can sustain them? The livestock units that people keep are far below what can sustain a household. So you come and tell a household that is already struggling to reduce, and you don't even provide alternatives. And the other thing, of course, is these alternatives that are not there because of the nature of the environment. Rainfall is quite low in the area. The soils are not good enough for farming. Water is stressed. You don't have permanent water sources for irrigation. So the alternatives are not also there when you tell them move. And
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Akagelo, one thing that you'll see happening across Africa is that when you're bringing solutions to Africa, there's always the tendency to copy and paste without putting into perspectives the natural setting of the place. So, for example, in terms of drought, you'll see irrigated agriculture as a solution being brought to pastoralists, and not a solution that works with their nature. So how then can you merge technology and the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous landscape when we talk about changing the narratives in Africa?
Thank you very much. It's quite interesting. I like the copy and paste, and I think it will never work for anyone. If you go with copy and paste, it will never work. But we go to school because we want to learn from what others have done. So we should not copy and paste, but we should learn from what others have done. I will start from what Traore said, for instance, for this matrix where everything is judged based on the productivity. I think there is a positive message to tell Africa or the others that you need to increase productivity where there is a need. The message is correct, but the measurement is not correct. And for me, when we try to see the issue of the livestock sector and emissions, we should not look only at the actual animal, as Traore said. It's the value chain. I come from a different system where we use a lot of fertilizers to produce feed. Imagine how much nitrogen that goes to maize production. If you see the emissions from the nitrogen industry, then you understand where the issues are. Now, if we have to come back to Africa, we need nitrogen for production. But we should not copy. What are the options we have? He talked, and Mkoro said it also, some trees that we can use that can help to fix nitrogen in the system. It's a reduction in terms of the emissions. And we should look for the credit for it in terms of demonstrating that the nitrogen we are able to fix, I heard about something, the Bracharia grass, that can fix nitrogen, that can sequestrate carbon. These are the things we need to do. We need to fix carbon. We need to have nitrogen in the system, but we don't have to copy. That is one thing. You refer to irrigation. Definitely, we need irrigation, but it's not blind eyes. How do we make sure that every drop counts? We were talking about pastoralists and so on, and we know they are the first one to be really affected by droughts in some of the cases. Namukoro was talking about the adaptation funds. How do we make sure that we have water management systems in those locations that allow them to save water? Solutions exist. Why we don't apply them? Let us not copy and paste, but learn from what others are doing. And it's really very interesting to understand. And one of the critical things as we try to address this, I like the socio-ecological resilience science, where you have to have a really systems thinking, where you need to think about different aspects before you narrow or you zoom into an issue. For instance, if I take the work we do at CGIR, we have 5 impact areas where we talk about climate, we talk about biodiversity, environment, we talk about nutrition, we talk about poverty reduction, we talk about gender youth. How do we make sure that as we have the debate around livestock, we take that into consideration? People are sending children to school because of livestock. That is livelihood. People, we need animal products in our diet. I remember when I was young, someone came to our school and said, this month you should not be eating meat. And he said, really, should you stop eating meat? And we said, yes, because that is what's said for this month. And the person looked at us and said, how many times do you get meat at home? Once in a week or twice in 2 weeks? He said, no, continue eating meat, because you just eat meat twice in a month. But I've overheard here that you drink a lot of beer from banana. You produce beer from banana and you drink on a daily basis. So stop drinking the whole month and eat more meat. So not copy and paste, but try to see really how do we have a system thinking and make sure that we have livestock for nutrition, but we make livestock climate smart. We know the solution. We need to do additional research for adaptation. I like your question. Let us not copy and paste. something has happened. We talk about the Green Revolution in Africa, for instance. It happened in Asia before Africa, but there have been serious environmental issues. We should make sure that we learn from what they did in terms of the positive aspect, and we also learn in terms of avoiding the negative effect to the whole 5 impact areas I mentioned. I will stop here in the interest of time.
Thank you. And Mkolo, one thing that Africa has often been criticized for is the lack of implementation of policies. We come up with all these kinds of brilliant policies. Hussein and his team will do all these kinds of brilliant research with brilliant recommendations, and then we read and do a media launch. Oh yes, we have this policy, put it in a shelf and forget about it. So what is it that needs to change if we are to implement these policies? Is it the communication strategy? Is it the policy itself? What is it that needs to change as we talk about changing narratives?
Look, when I look at the policy landscape on the African continent, we actually have some of the best policies on this planet. If you look at it, if you look at food systems transformation and look at what people put in place. But I think what we often lose sight of is the context within which those policies need to be implemented. So we have definitely our own governments need to invest in implementation. But in addition to that, we have a lot of tensions that actually prevent us from getting where we need to go. One is definitely resources. So you've got a wonderful plan and then you don't have the money to actually invest. And perhaps doing it stepwise, not necessarily wanting to implement the whole program at once, but do it bit by bit, that would actually help us. What should work in our favor, which we do not do enough of, is actually build on what our communities are able to do. So rather than build on what the communities can do for themselves and help them with that, from a political standpoint, we want to make promises as quick wins to win an election. And so you set expectations in communities of they'll come and give me this, and they'll come and give me that. And then they simply get upset at you because you've set expectations. So that's one of the problems that we actually have. The other one that I have that I would like to bring forth is there's a lot that comes to Africa as foreign direct investment that really we should say thank you very much, we don't need this one. Because if you see what often happens, a big company comes, they promise jobs, and we sing and dance and our politicians win elections on that project. And then what's the first thing the company does? They want a tax break. So you come into a country that is already struggling in terms of resources. You say you are going to invest, and in that investment you will make money. But the first thing you ask for is you don't want to pay taxes. And then at the same time, we then complain about why the government does not have money to actually implement. So there are some of those tensions. There are multiple issues I could talk about for hours, but just in the interest of time.
Yes, and unfortunately, time is not on our side. Maybe we could take just one question before anybody with a question, comment, burning question, comment? Oh, you do? Okay.
Bon, il a évoqué une question importante, c'est-à-dire l'effectif des animaux par famille. Vous avez dit comment réduire cela. Je pense que c'est une question qui est mal posée. Parce qu'il faut comprendre la philosophie de l'effectif du troupeau en Afrique. C'est comme si on vous demandait de réduire votre compte bancaire. Vous n'allez pas accepter. Donc, il faut comprendre cela. C'est-à-dire que quand vous voyez un effectif dans une famille donnée, les animaux n'appartiennent pas à une seule personne. Il y a le chef de famille qui a tant, les épouses qui ont tant, les neveux qui ont tant. Donc, si on doit réduire, les animaux de qui on va réduire? C'est ça, il faut le comprendre. Donc, je pense que, bon, maintenant, si on travaille, comme quelqu'un l'a dit, si on travaille sur l'amélioration génétique, peut-être que quand les animaux vont produire mieux, les gens vont tout essayer de réduire. Mais on ne peut pas d'ores et déjà dire qu'il faut réduire sans donner une alternative. Parce que c'est comme si vous demandez à quelqu'un de réduire son compte bancaire, ce n'est pas possible. Et je voulais juste ajouter aussi que quand tu prends le cas du Sénégal, prends le mouton. Le mouton a une importance capitale. Vous savez, la tabaski, quand ça arrive, il faut que chacun ait son mouton. Et ça, ce n'est pas de la monnaie, ce n'est pas une évaluation monétaire. Mais vous allez voir dans cette famille, j'ai fait un étudiant qui a fait un travail d'enquête pour savoir pourquoi les gens élèvent les moutons. Les gens vous diront parce qu'on m'a dit d'élever les moutons, parce que c'est socialement important, parce que la religion le demande, parce que. Donc tous ces aspects doivent être pris en compte quand on veut évaluer vraiment la contribution de notre élevage dans l'environnement de façon générale. Ce que je voulais ajouter. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Anyone with a question? Oh, there is a microphone. Keep your questions short and straight to the point.
Really, thank you for your presentation and happy to be here. I like the word systemic thinking that you are using while you are just explaining the questions. But in systemic thinking and fitting the transition to the real situations in Africa, the capacity building, especially in terms of technology, in terms of techniques, are very important. Do you think that this capacity building systems are reached to the grassroots community that is affected with the series of this climate change effect? Thank you.
That was a comment, not a question. Great. So now I'd like to invite another young guy from Africa, Josephat Masanja from Tanzania. He's the East Africa Coordinator for Africa Youth Pastoralist Initiative, and he'll tell us a little bit about the youth perspectives in changing the narratives in the livestock subsector. Okay.
Thank you so much, moderator. I was quite interested to talk on the issue of reducing the number of animals. Of course, it has been a very famous topic in Africa. These government policymakers, they talk always on the issue of reducing number of heads. But yesterday, I was following the comments of one of the famous researchers in Africa, Aaron Savory from Zimbabwe. He talked a little bit on the issue of reducing the number of heads. He said, stocking rate has no basis of science. It is only based on our belief. The science has been telling us that overgrazing of plant has nothing to do with number of animals, but it has got everything to do with how many days is the plant exposed to grazing and how many days the plant get time to recover. I think that is very important because these policymakers always say livestock causes overgrazing, but they don't recognize how many times they have been helping these pastoralists to get land resources, which is sufficient for them to feed their animal. So that is very important for we to recognize when we are creating a new narrative for livestock sector in Africa. But also incorporating the youth and women in undertaking all these binding constraints in livestock sector is very significant. I have been working with different youths across Africa, especially in East Africa. They have vibrant idea. They have a lot of idea that is very important for us to incorporate, especially when we are addressing these issues of climate crisis. So they need actual access to resources, access to finance, access to technology, access to every resources that is great for us to incorporate in these climate action issues. Even now, you can even trace this Conference of Parties 28 people from, these young people from pastoral community, I don't think if they can even range to 100 or 200, they are few. So they need representation to the global platform like COP, like Africa's Food System Summit, so that they can represent the idea of pastoral community to this global platform and see their specific needs are addressed. That is very significant. So the role of young people in transforming livestock sector is very clear because they are tech saver, they have a lot of idea, they are energetic, they can combat a climate crisis in all way we can decide. So that is very significant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for lady and gentlemen. One lady and many gentlemen. Thank you so thank you so much for honoring the call to get here on a Sunday morning so early. I know it's not easy to be here so early on a Sunday morning when it takes almost 2 hours to get here by public transport. But thank you for honoring the call to be here. And I hope that the message here does not die here. That even when we go back home, we continue the messages of how to change livestock narratives in Africa, because there's so many people out there who say, just stop eating meat altogether. Don't eat any animal altogether. But you're here saying, yeah, you can eat meat. There's nothing wrong with meat. So I hope you take this message back home, and we also encourage our governments to implement the policies, and we involve the local communities in those policies, in the construction of those policies. My name is Zena Bondati. I've been your moderator over this hour. I believe we have ended right on time. Right on time. And we hope to keep engaging at COP28. Have a good day, everyone.